At my son's 40th birthday party, my daughter-in-law pulled me aside near the coat rack and whispered, "We've rearranged the tables a little. You're going to be over there, at the round table by the kitchen. It'll be more comfortable for you, away from all the noise." I looked across the ballroom. The round table by the kitchen was where they had seated the teenagers. I was the only adult there. I smiled and said, "Whatever you think is best, Maya." She patted my arm and walked back toward the main tables, where my son was laughing with his coworkers under the chandelier I had chosen and paid for myself. She didn't know that I had written the check for this entire evening. Good evening, dear listeners. My name is Lily, and I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. If this is your first time, welcome. If you've been here before, you know I only share stories that are true, including the ones that are hardest to tell. Please take a moment to like this video and share it if something in it reaches you. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I love knowing how far these stories travel. I spent 38 years as a registered nurse at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. My late husband, George, was a high school history teacher. We were not wealthy people, but we were careful. We saved. We invested slowly and sensibly. When George passed 4 years ago, after a long illness, he left behind a paid-off house, a respectable retirement account, and a note on his nightstand that read, "You're stronger than you think, Lily. Don't let anyone tell you different." I thought about that note a lot in the months that followed. My son, my only child, was 38 years old when his father died. He had a good job in commercial real estate development in Atlanta, a beautiful home in a suburb with excellent schools, a wife who had left her interior design work when their first child was born, and 2 kids I adored, a 16-year-old boy who loved baseball, and a 13-year-old girl who wrote poems in a purple notebook she carried everywhere. The requests began 6 weeks after George's funeral. The first was small. My son called on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sorting through his father's books. "Mom, I hate to bring this up, but we've got a leak in the basement that's spreading. The contractor says if we don't act now, it'll compromise the foundation. I just need to get through to next quarter's commission check." I transferred $3,000 that same evening. I told myself George would have done the same. Then, it was the children's school, a private academy that cost more than my first mortgage. "They're thriving there, Mom. We can't pull them now. Could you just help with this semester?" I helped with that semester, and then the next. Then it was a car. The transmission died on the highway. "Mom, we can't have the kids in an unsafe vehicle." $14,000. Then it was a vacation to Cabo San Lucas. The kids have never seen the ocean properly. It would mean so much to them. I wired the money and told myself it was a gift, not a loan. Even though my son had said, "I'll pay you back the moment this next deal closes," the deal never seemed to close. But I kept giving because the requests always came wrapped in something I couldn't refuse. My grandchildren's well-being, their education, their safety, their happiness. And because I missed George, and because being needed felt, in those hollow months after his death, like a reason to get up in the morning. When my son called in early March to say he was planning a big 40th birthday party and could I help with the venue deposit, I was almost relieved. It seemed like something forward-looking, a celebration. I asked how much the deposit was. He said the events coordinator needed $8,000 to hold the date, and the full balance, another $14,000, would be due 2 weeks before the party. He sounded genuinely embarrassed, asking, "It's a lot. I know, but my wife has been planning this for months. I hate to disappoint her. Send me the coordinator's contact information," I said. "I'll pay it directly. I want to pause here because this matters for everything that comes after." I did not transfer money to my son's bank account. I called the events coordinator myself gave her my credit card number, and paid $22,000 directly to the venue. My son knew I had covered it. His wife knew a payment had been made, but I don't think either of them fully reckoned with the fact that my name was on the receipt, that every centerpiece and past appetizer and hour of open bar represented something I had personally authorized. I drove myself to Atlanta for the party. I had a new dress, navy blue, bought on sale. I was early, which is a habit from decades of hospital shifts. The room was beautiful. White linens, tall floral arrangements in blush and ivory, soft lighting. I had unknowingly approved when the coordinator described the package over the phone. My son's friends and co-workers were already filling the main tables. My daughter-in-law was at the center of it all, directing a caterer in a hushed, important voice. She spotted me near the entrance and came over. She was wearing a dress I recognized from a store window we had passed together months earlier, the kind of store where you don't go in unless you're prepared for the prices. She kissed my cheek. "Lily, you look great." "Hey." So we did a little rearranging with the tables. There are more people than we expected. She nodded toward the back of the room, near the swinging kitchen door. "You'll be over there. It's actually quieter, which I thought you might appreciate." I looked. There were 4 teenagers at the round table, including my own grandson, who gave me an awkward wave. The rest of the room held 8 tables set for 8, each one occupied by people my son's age, dressed in business casual, drinking wine and talking with the ease of people who belong exactly where they are. I thought of about 4 different things to say. I said, "Of course. Whatever you think." She smiled the particular smile of someone who has resolved a potential problem without drama and walked back toward the bar. I sat down beside my grandson. He leaned over and said quietly, "Grandma, why are you back here?" "Your mom thought I'd be more comfortable," I said. He looked at the kitchen door, then at the main room. He was 16 and had enough sense to understand what was happening, which made it worse. I stayed for 2 hours. I ate the salmon I had paid for. I watched my son give a speech at the main table, where his coworkers laughed and raised their glasses, and I thought about the note George had left on the nightstand. On the drive back to my hotel, I turned off the radio and sat with what had happened. Not the embarrassment I had survived. Worse, but a question I had been refusing to ask for 4 years. What exactly did my son think of me? Not as his mother, as a person. I thought about it all night. By morning, I had my answer. I called my friend Ruth the next day. Ruth and I had met in nursing school in 1976 and stayed close through 2 husbands between us, 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and more years of coffee and hard honesty than I could count. She had retired 3 years ago from a career as a certified public accountant. She had been gently telling me for years that I needed to get my financial house in order. "Tell me what happened," she said. I told her everything. The party, the table by the kitchen, the 4 years of transfers, the amounts I could remember off the top of my head. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm coming to Charlotte this weekend. Pull every bank statement you have going back to the year George died." She arrived Saturday morning with a legal pad, a red pen, and no patience for denial. We sat at my kitchen table for 6 hours. Ruth went through every statement methodically. She wrote numbers in columns. She used a calculator she had owned since the 90s. When she finally set down the pen, she pushed the legal pad across the table to me. The number at the bottom was $143,200. "In 4 years," Ruth said, not unkindly. "That's what you've sent them." I counted the transactions. Some I remembered clearly. Others I had forgotten entirely, absorbed into the routine of receiving a call, feeling the familiar urgency, and reaching for my phone to open my bank app. The list included private school tuition for 4 semesters, a car, the Cabo vacation, A kitchen renovation my daughter-in-law had described as an emergency after a pipe burst, though the photographs she later posted on her design account looked like something from a glossy magazine. A second car, dental work, described as critical, and now $22,000 for a party where I sat with the teenagers. Not $1 had come back. Have you looked at their social media lately? Ruth asked. She opened her tablet and showed me my daughter-in-law's Instagram account. There was a photo from 2 months ago. A white BMW in the driveway. My daughter-in-law, with her hand on the hood, captioned, "Upgrade." Before that, a photo from what appeared to be a private box at an NFL game. Before that, a resort in Turks and Caicos I had never heard them mention. There were photos from my grandson's baseball tournament, where my daughter-in-law wore a jacket from a brand that charged $400 for fleece. These were not people who were struggling. These were people who had learned, gradually and then completely, that I was a resource with no stated limit and no repayment terms. Ruth said it the way only someone who has known you for nearly 50 years can say it. Lily, they have been treating you like a fund with no maturity date. And you let them because you love those kids and you miss George and you told yourself that was simply what family does. I didn't argue. We spent the rest of the afternoon making a plan. The first call on Monday morning was to an estate attorney in Charlotte named Carol, who came recommended through Ruth's former law firm. I told her I needed to review my estate documents, restructure my assets, and do it quickly. She asked what was prompting it. I walked her through everything. She asked for the bank statements. I emailed them before I got off the phone. We met 2 days later. Carol had reviewed everything and sat across from me with the direct manner of someone who had seen this before. "The money you transferred," she said, "is almost certainly gone. Without a written loan agreement, recovery would be difficult and expensive. But we can absolutely protect what remains." She explained a revocable living trust that would take my home, my savings, and my investment accounts out of my direct name, while I maintained full control as trustee. A revised will, educational accounts for both grandchildren accessible at 25, with a named trustee who was not my son. A durable power of attorney naming Ruth not my son as my financial agent if I ever needed one. "What your son currently has," Carol said, "is informal access and the assumption that it will continue. Once you restructure, that assumption ends, and he'll know." "Yes, fairly quickly." "Good," I said. The paperwork was complete by the end of the week. My son called on a Sunday morning. I was in the garden pulling weeds when the phone rang. "Mom." His voice was tight in the specific way of someone trying to sound calm. "I got a notification from the bank. The joint savings account is closed. And there's a letter from an attorney's office." "What is going on?" I sat down on the porch steps. "I've reorganized my finances," I said. "Without telling me?" "That account was set up so I could help you manage things if you needed." "I don't need help managing things. You're 69 years old. You shouldn't be making major financial decisions alone." "Who's been talking to you about this?" I noticed that question. Not "are you okay?" Not "can we talk?" The immediate assumption that someone else must be responsible for my own decision. "No one is talking to me into anything," I said. "I reviewed my finances and decided to make changes." "What changes?" "Why?" Then, after a pause, "Is this about the party?" "It's about 4 years," I said. "It's about $143,000 and a table by the kitchen door." Silence. "That's not fair," he finally said. "We've been under enormous pressure. The market has been brutal. The kids' school. The cost of everything." "I know exactly what the school costs," I said. "I paid for it, Mom." His voice shifted into something younger, something that almost sounded like the boy he had been before he learned I would always say yes. "We're family. This is what family does. We help each other. When's my birthday? I asked. What? My birthday. When is it? A pause. March 12th? March 4th, I said. I've had the same birthday for 69 years. A longer silence. I've been stressed. You didn't call on my birthday last year, I said. Or the year before. I went through my call log. The only times you've called in 2 years were when you needed something. I've counted. When he finally spoke again, his voice had cooled into something I didn't recognize. I'm going to give you a few days. Then we should talk in person. I think you might be dealing with some unresolved grief. I recognized the move immediately. Ruth had warned me about it. I'm not grieving my way into a new estate plan, I said. I'm simply done. Done with what? Done being a bank, I said. Done being seated at the children's table in a room I paid for. Done having my birthday forgotten by the only person who remembers to call when he needs money. He hung up. The next call came 2 days later from my daughter-in-law. Her tone was the careful tone of someone reading from notes. I want to apologize for the seating at the party, she said. That was an oversight I should have handled differently. Thank you, I said. I also want to say as someone who cares about you that I'm worried. Ruth is lovely. But financial decisions at your stage of life really need professional guidance from someone who understands your full situation. Carol is a board-certified estate attorney, I said. I believe that qualifies. A pause. I said I would think about it and ended the call. I told Carol everything that afternoon. She said what she expected to come next. Appeals to reason, then appeals to love, and then, if they felt truly locked out, possibly a legal challenge to my competency. A competency petition? I said. It's a tactic, she said. If they can argue that you made these decisions while mentally impaired, they could seek conservatorship. The threat alone sometimes accomplishes what the actual filing never could. She told me to see my doctor, document every conversation, and not to allow them into my home without a witness. I called my doctor's office the next morning. They arrived on a Saturday, all 4 of them. My son, in a pressed shirt. My daughter-in-law, with a casserole dish she set on my counter without asking. The children slightly bewildered by whatever they had been told on the drive over. My granddaughter was watching me with steady eyes, a purple notebook tucked under her arm. Ruth was sitting in my living room. She had driven up from Asheville the evening before. 3 hours, without complaint or explanation. That is what decades of friendship actually looks like. My son took the armchair that had been George's. He folded his hands in his lap, with the patient expression of someone managing a difficult situation. Mom, we just want to understand what's happening. I think you understand, I said. I don't. I'm looking at someone I love, making decisions that don't make sense, cutting off her own family. I reviewed bank records, I said. I didn't cut off anyone. I stopped an outflow. My daughter-in-law leaned forward. Lily, with all due respect, this kind of sudden distrust of family, these accusations, this is sometimes a sign that something neurological is beginning. It can come on gradually after a significant loss. There is nothing neurological happening, Ruth said from her chair. I have known this woman for 48 years. She is sharper than everyone in this room. My daughter-in-law looked at Ruth the way people look at an obstacle they hadn't planned for. My son's voice softened. Mom, we're not your enemies. We love you. But if you're going to make decisions like this, major, irreversible decisions, we have a responsibility to make sure you're all right. If you won't let us help, we may need to ask a court to step in. There it was. The children, I said, looking at the 2 of them on the love seat, should not be in this conversation. My granddaughter looked up from her notebook. She had been writing this entire time. I'm not a child, she said quietly. You're 13, my son said. And I can see what's happening, she said. She looked at me. Grandma, are you okay? Yes, sweetheart. She looked at her father. Then I think we should go. My son looked at his daughter with an expression I couldn't fully read. He stood, straightened his shirt, looked at me once more. This isn't over. I know, I said. But this conversation is. They left. My grandson looked back at me from the doorway with a small, helpless shrug that cracked something open in my chest. Ruth closed the door and stood there with her hand still on the knob. That girl, she said quietly, meaning my granddaughter, is going to be something. I know, I said. The legal filing came 5 weeks later. My son and daughter-in-law had retained an attorney and petitioned for a psychological evaluation and temporary oversight of my finances. The petition cited a sudden pattern of paranoid and erratic behavior following the death of her spouse and pointed to the trust restructuring as evidence of impaired judgment. Carol's response was calm and thorough. She submitted, Dr. Warren's cognitive evaluation I had scored in the 91st percentile for my age group, a fact he mentioned with visible amusement, along with Ruth's certified financial analysis, my physician's sworn declaration, and 3 years of bank statements documenting every transfer. She also filed subpoenas for my son and daughter-in-law's financial records. My son called within 48 hours of receiving that notice. You're subpoenaing our bank records? You filed a court petition claiming I'm incompetent, I said. This is Mom. This is completely out of proportion. You're going to drag our finances into public record over a seating arrangement? You filed publicly, I said. Not me. A silence. When he spoke again, the legal composure was gone. Something more genuine had taken its place, though I wasn't sure if it was regret or simply calculation. Mom, please, I'll pay you back. Some of it. We can work out a schedule. Whatever you want. Have your attorney contact Carol, I said. She'll be in touch. The hearing was held on a Tuesday in Mecklenburg County. The courtroom was plain and fluorescent lit. Nothing like television. I kept my hands flat on the table in front of me, the way George used to in difficult meetings. The opposing attorney presented his case with a great deal of language about welfare and the tragedy of a grieving widow acting in isolation. When Carol stood, she presented Dr. Warren's evaluation first, then the financial records. On cross-examination, she asked my daughter-in-law one question. On the evening of my client's son's 40th birthday party, did you direct Lily to sit at a table separate from the other adult guests? My daughter-in-law looked at the table. There was a seating situation. Yes or no? Yes. And were you aware that Lily had personally paid for the venue, the catering, and all costs associated with that evening $22,000 charged directly to her credit card? A pause. I knew she had contributed. She paid the entire bill. Her name is on the receipt. That receipt is in Exhibit F. Carol turned to the judge. This is the behavior the petitioners characterize as evidence of impaired judgment. My client paid for something and was then treated as an inconvenience at her own expense. She decided that pattern was no longer acceptable. I would argue that decision reflects excellent judgment. The judge, a man in his late 50s with reading glasses he kept removing and replacing, denied the petition without leaving the bench. He also noted, for the record, that the financial documentation raised questions the family might wish to address through proper channels, and that the court would not be a vehicle for regaining access to assets that had been legally and competently restructured. Outside the courthouse, my son tried to speak to me. I walked past him, not with cruelty, with the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been asked to perform forgiveness before she has been allowed to finish feeling the wound. Consequences arrived quietly in the months that followed. The subpoenaed records showed that during the same 4 years, I had transferred $143,200. My son and daughter-in-law had spent well over $50,000 on things that had nothing to do with leaking basements or urgent dental work. Resort memberships, luxury car leases, wine storage, a weekend in New York that appeared on their credit card statement the same month they told me the kids' tuition was past due. His employer became aware of the proceedings. In commercial real estate, financial judgment is not considered a private character trait. He was passed over for a partnership he had been expecting for 2 years. Their house went on the market in the spring. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt the way you feel when something that has been causing quiet pain for a long time is finally completely gone, relieved, hollow, and very still. A letter arrived in October, in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, on plain stationery. She wrote that she knew she owed me more than money, that she had told herself for 4 years that what she was receiving was generosity from someone who had plenty and wanted to give, that she had made herself not think too hard about what those transfers actually meant, what I might have been going without, what I might have been quietly deferring, that the party seating had not been intended as cruelty, but had been cruelty in practice, and she had come to understand the difference between intention and effect. She said she was not asking for anything. She just needed me to know she understood now. I read it twice. Then I put it in the drawer, beside George's note. In November, my granddaughter rang my doorbell on a school afternoon. She was wearing the purple jacket she had owned for 3 years, the one she refused to retire because she said it was her thinking coat. She had taken the city bus from her new school, which was a public school now in a neighborhood that was quieter than their old one. I made hot chocolate. She sat at my kitchen table and opened her notebook. I wrote something, she said. Can I read it to you? Please, I said. She read me a poem about a woman who tends a garden alone each morning, who discovers late that the garden was never meant to be a gift for people who never came. It was the whole point by itself. It was not a technically perfect poem. She was 13, but it was honest in the way that good writing always is, even before the writer knows what they've made. When she finished, she looked up. Did you write that about me? I asked. I wrote it about everyone who gives too much, she said. You were who I was thinking about. I drove her home at dusk. Her mother answered the door. We didn't speak. We looked at each other across a long silence, the kind built from both sides. And then my granddaughter stepped inside, and I drove back through the city as the streetlights came on, one by one, in the early dark. I thought about what I had lost and what I had not. I had lost $143,200, which I would likely never fully recover, and which I had made a kind of peace with, not happily, but practically, the way you make peace with weather. I had lost the version of my son I had believed in, which turned out never to have existed quite the way I had imagined it. That loss was the real one, the one that didn't simplify into numbers. But I had not lost myself. I had found, at 69 years old, that I was still here, someone with opinions about gardens and books, with friendships worth 3-hour drives, with a granddaughter who wrote poems about generous women and thought of me when she did. I started a ceramics class that winter. My bowls were lopsided, and I loved them. I began treating my birthday the way it deserved to be treated, making reservations at restaurants George and I had loved, calling Ruth, going without needing an occasion. On the morning of March 4th, my phone rang. My granddaughter's voice. Happy birthday, Grandma. I stood in my kitchen and cried. Not from sadness, from the simple, enormous relief of being known by someone. To everyone listening tonight, especially if you recognized something familiar in this story, I want to say this. There is no version of love that requires you to disappear. There is no version of family that gives one person the right to treat another as a resource and not as a human being. And there is no age at which it is too late to look clearly at what is happening and decide you deserve something better. I spent 4 years believing I was being useful. I should have spent those years believing I was enough simply as I was. Don't wait as long as I did. If this story stayed with you, please share it. Someone out there needs to hear that the table by the kitchen door is not where they belong. Thank you for spending this evening with me. I'm Lily, and I'll see you next time.